And we're always thrilled to be working with FSG, who's the publisher of this book. And tonight we will be presenting the launch of Edith Schloss, The Loft Generation. And The Loft Generation, from the de Koonings to Twombly, is a first-hand account by an artist at the center of a landmark era in American art. Edith Schloss writes about the artists, poets, and musicians who were part of the post-war art movements in America, and about her life as an artist in America and later in Italy, where she continued to paint and write until her death in 2011. Schloss was born in Germany and moved to New York City during World War II. She became part of a thriving community of artists and intellectuals, from Elaine and Willem de Kooning and Larry Rivers to John Cage and Frank O'Hara. She married the photographer and filmmaker Rudy Burckhardt. She was both a working artist and an incisive art critic, and was a candid and gimlet-eyed observer of the close-knit community that was redefining American art. In later life, she lived in Italy and spent time with such artists as Giorgio Morandi, Cy Twombly, Merritt Oppenheim, and Francesco Woodman. In The Loft Generation, Schloss creates a rare and irreplaceable up-close record of an era of artistic innovation and the colorful characters who made it happen. There is no other book like it. The first-hand information is indispensable reading for all critics and researchers of that vital period in American art. And tonight we are very happy to be joined in conversation by Jacob Burckhardt, who is a filmmaker, photographer, and sound designer, and teaches at the Pratt Institute in the Cooper Union. He is the son of Edith Schloss and Rudy Burckhardt, and has been involved in the Loft Generation project for many years. And in conversation is also Phillip Lopate, who is a central figure in the revival of the American essay, both throughout his ubiquitous edited anthologies, Art of the Personal Essay and the Glorious American Essay, and his own essay collections, Bachelorhood, Against Joie de Vivre, Portrait of My Body, Portrait Inside My Head. His other nonfiction includes Being with Children, Waterfront, Notes on Sontag, and Rudy Burckhardt, photographer. He is a professor at writing at Columbia University. And afterwards, there will be time for questions. So stick around for that and a signing. And our bar will remain open for about 30 minutes after the talk, so feel free to go down and get a beer or a glass of wine. Thank you, and join me in welcoming Jacob and Phillip.
Well, thank you all for coming, and thank you to McNally Jackson for doing this, and Farah Strauss-Rooks for organizing this, and Phillip for being here. Especially Phillip, because you have also, not only for being here, but you've been involved in this project for a long time.
Yes, sir.
You read it, you read the book several years ago and were very encouraging, and encouragement from Phillip is real, because if he's critical, he's critical. And even when you were doing Rudy Burckhardt, you interviewed Edith, didn't you?
I certainly did, yes.
Yeah. So, okay. That's even before the book. So, I guess I'll read from the beginning of the book. Bill and Elaine's Loft. When I first met her, Elaine, I did not recognize her. The truth is, I did not even care for her. It was in Elaine and Bill's loft in 1943 or 44, on an icy New York winter's day. I was going to the Art Students League. Bill was about 40, and she and I were in our 20s, and I had just come from the first loft I had ever laid eyes on, which I then had no idea I would ever call my own. Coming from Europe, I believed in abstraction. The Art Students League and the few galleries up and down 57th Street showed figuration, pensive and sad, or acid and lurid, of men and women in sweatshops, in subways, and on farms, exploited, exhausted by the Depression, or modern French masters. But the first art show I ever saw in my life had been a Paul Klee exhibition in the Buchholz Gallery on 57th Street, where they also showed the severe, neat cubism of Juan Gris. I was hungry for more abstraction. Then, at a party of political refugees in a farmhouse in New Jersey, near Flemington Junction, that had been renovated by the German socialist Fritz Hensler, I saw a small painting. It was green and gray and black. In it leaned a curvilinear shape, like the number 8, or 2 sliced O's, egg-like shapes, snugly fitting. There was something still and clear about the little thing. The small abstraction was beautiful. I'd never seen anything like it. Fairfield Porter found me staring at it. "Would you like me to take you to the man who did that?" he asked. I was thrilled. To get to know the man who had painted such a picture, to go to an artist's studio, to see more of his pictures, was wonderful. Fairfield said we should meet the next Sunday on 21st Street, where he had once shared a loft with the photographer Ellen or Pitt Auerbach. It was a grim winter morning, and harsh, cold sunlight flooded the street, pitilessly outlining the rows of factory windows as well as each pebble on the pavement. There were no pedestrians. Sundays were melancholy in Chelsea, I was to learn later. In the bright emptiness, a gust of sharp wind lifted a rag, a shred of newspaper. "Just like Odessa," said Fairfield as he walked me across the gritty sidewalk to the next block, to a loft building on 22nd Street. I was impressed. He had said it so lightly. He had been to legendary Russia. We climbed up the wooden staircase, steeper than usual, to the second and top floor. Here we found a small door. We knocked. We knocked and knocked. We knocked for a long time. When the door was finally opened, the man who stood there looked aghast at Fairfield and me. He was obviously quite disappointed. But then he caught himself with quick, cheerful politeness and asked us inside. The strange disappointment was explained later. When Bill de Kooning worked, he worked. He would paint without ceasing for hours and hours. He would bear no interruption of any kind, would open the door to no one. Fairfield, a figurative painter, but a good friend and patron, had planned to help the then poor and unrecognized Bill by bringing the critic Paul Rosenfeld to appraise his work. Some Sundays before, Fairfield had taken the critic by the scruff of the neck and brought him downtown. Bill was in a fury of work. Fairfield and Rosenfeld knocked and knocked. Neither Bill nor Elaine would open, nor did they suspect that a respected critic, who could do any number of things for them, was on the other side of the door. When Fairfield explained to them later what had happened, they were crushed. They promised they would be good and open the door the next time. But the next time, when Bill finally stopped work and opened the door, there was Fairfield all right, but with him was no critic, only an art student in a red hat, me. Still, mild and good-humored, the painter quickly got over the shock and made us welcome in his studio. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. Everywhere were surfaces lashed with paint, flows and drips and spatters of paint, linear demarcations and gashes like frontiers, and ghost-like empty spaces where a canvas had been attacked. On canvases there were waterfalls of paint and wide swaths of cancellations. On the floor, bits of drawings on cut-out tracing paper and newsprint used to mask spaces lay on gritty boards spattered with paint. There was a large, long table loaded down with oil paint tubes, jars of enamel paint, plate glass covered with mounds of paint, coffee cans full of paint, knives, scrapers, sandpaper, rolls of masking tape, and brushes of every size and shape laid out in rows. A veritable landscape of paint and materials. To the right, towards 22nd Street, a large factory window of frosted glass muted the northern light. Bits of tape, tracing paper and newsprint, comics and magazine cutouts were stuck to it. There were canvas racks and shelves on which stacked canvases looked in and out. Opposite this drama was an old armchair, bulging, its springs half broken, covered with yellowish-brown velours. This was where the painter sat down to stare at what he had just created. While I am writing this, I realize that today such a setup, the large painted walls, the homemade easel, the large table flooded with materials, is perfectly ordinary in a painter's loft. But what is a common style now was invented then by Bill and his friends to fill their new needs. At the time, it astounded me. There was the smell of fire and brimstone in the air. Here, epic struggles had taken place. A man had been measuring himself against the gods with nothing but a stick covered with paint in his hand. A small man, standing in front of a big, messy flatness, offering itself to his truth. When I was little, I saw a Hollywood movie about a storm at sea. The ship plunged into giant troughs, then wobbled and climbed up, only to have 3-story high waves hurl it down again. In all this foaming stood the skipper, sou'wester slicker dripping wet, legs wide, straddling the deck, his hands on the helm, mastering the bucking wheel. With every part of his body at play, the skipper was giving all he got. He was all there. He was measuring his power against another power. So Bill would stand in front of his painting. The emptiness there was a force of nature to be overcome. The painter took on his own painting. Wide-legged, he stared at his past, his present, his enemy, his friend. There was abandon here, and joy and pain. It was daunting and it was exhilarating. How could you ever achieve anything like that? I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. There was an inner room, soothing after the thin air of the big paint-inhabited studio. It was a dark, square cubicle, like a Pompeian dining room, and was painted in satiny purplish grays. There were touches of yellow. There were solid chairs, and their backs made of 2 curved iron rods. The chairs, the big square table, the double bed like a big box, all stood on iron rods. They looked like the basic symbols of chairs, of a table, of a bed. They were so starkly themselves. It was a ship-shape, scrubbed interior, made by Bill. It was basic and simple, but glowed like a jewel box. We all sat down around the table. Beyond this room, there must have been more space, a kitchen and the usual Loft factory windows and fire escape over the empty lot on 22nd Street. From there, suddenly someone appeared. Had she been there all along, or had she just come in? She had bangs and wore elegant Scotch plaid slacks. Without a word, she handed coffee mugs to each of us with an air so aloof, I thought she was a patron of Bill's, who had just come downtown from her Park Avenue apartment to give a hand to the poor artist. A man in an army greatcoat joined us. Milton Resnick, a follower of Bill's, a soldier who had until recently been stationed in Iceland. He and Bill and Fairfield were all looking up at the pretty woman. She moved among them with graceful assurance. The atmosphere had changed. Who was this, speaking so brightly? Who was this, so admired by all these men for the way she spoke and moved? And then it dawned on me, it was Bill's wife, Elaine.
I'm going to start by saying that I love this book. I think it's very wittily written, very beautifully written, and it gives an incomparable picture of the art world at that time. So, could you tell us a little bit about how it looks so neat and four square now? But I know it wasn't always in that shape.
You can say that again. Yeah, it was kind of a saga, and I've been thinking about that. For one thing, I don't really know exactly when Edith wrote it. I remember that in about I think the late '90s or early 2000s, she gave me a manuscript which was basically part 1 of this book, which goes all the way down to Larry Rivers, but not the Joseph Cornell part, but everything but that. And it was a Xerox copy of a typescript, and I think I tried to take it to some places. Julie Martin helped me, and but nothing happened. I mean, nobody was interested. And in a way, they were right. It was kind of a mess because it was an early draft, and when Edith wrote, she would always do drafts. I mean, and the first draft was, and then she would actually cut and paste with scissors and paste rather than computers. And so anyhow, nothing happened then. And then in 2011, she died. And when there were about lots of boxes, well, it was 15 big boxes like this of writings of hers, which are now in the Columbia University Rare Books collection. And among them were this manuscript, and then also a lot of other of these articles that she wrote, memoirs of people that she knew, like Joseph Cornell and Merritt Oppenheim and Francesca Woodman and so forth. And so, then I sort of went over the main manuscript, and then Nathan Kernan was getting interested in it, and he had it digitized, and then went over it with Simon Pettit and with Annabelle Lee, and then through we had a publisher, and then unfortunately he got sick and he died, and he couldn't do it. And then
It's terrible when they die, they stop working for you.
That's right. It's a good excuse too. But then through Bob Cornfield, it got shown to John Galassi at Farrar, Straus and Brooks, and then so John Galassi looked at it and he said, "Well, it's good, but it needs a lot of editing." And I thought, well, I don't know. This is the way she wrote it. It shouldn't be edited. I thought for a while. And then a little while later, I think, what am I, an idiot? I mean, this is the best publisher that she could, she's never going to get a better publisher than this. So I went back to John, and he said yes. And then we got, so we needed an editor, and we got Mary Wilsey. And Mary Wilsey had edited a magazine called Wanted in Rome. And Edith had written for this magazine for like 25 years or something like that, and so Mary had edited her all that time, and Edith used to complain about about editors. They cut my stuff and they give me stupid titles and things like that, but she never complained about Mary. And once I asked Mary, well, I guess you didn't edit her much, right? I mean, because she never complained about you. And Mary said, no, I did all the time, but Edith liked what Mary did, and so anyhow, there it is. Here it is.
So, one of the things that comes up again and again, including the part you read, is this divide between the abstract painters and the figurative painters, and obviously it must have been a problem for Edith because ultimately she swung both ways,
Yeah, it's interesting because her later paintings get much wilder, actually, much more abstract than the early ones, I mean, basically, I think from the late '60s she started getting looser, and before that she was quite figurative. You're right, and
she had friends like Fairfield Porter, and I'm sure she knew Alex Katz and Jane Feilecker. Yeah. So and the whole when de Kooning starts painting the women paintings, she says that was seen as a betrayal by the abstract painters.
Yeah, but I don't know. I mean, she was really interested. I mean, she had this very kind of open interest in art. I mean, I think she liked to say, somebody asked me, what kind of art are you interested in? And she said, well, I'm interested in art between prehistoric and today.
Yeah, and she observed in the Koonings studio that he had this postcard of Masaccio's leaving Eden,
Right, of Adam and Eve, yes.
And that de Kooning was very interested in Titian and in Rubens, and he saw them as great exemplars of the application of paint, essentially.
Exactly, that's what she said, I think. Yeah, I mean, she said she's why is he interested in Rubens, and he was talking about how it's just like the paint on the canvas.
Yeah. So that was one division, and then another division, of course, were the politically engaged artists and those who refused to let their art become judged as improving social justice or something like that.
Well, she had sort of, when she came to America, she was involved in, because she was a German refugee, and she was hanging out with a lot of these German refugees. Some of them were Jewish refugees, but a lot of them were political. And so, like Karl Korsch and her boyfriend Hans Langerhans. I think when she started meeting people like Fairfield and that group, she sort of, she used to talk about art for art's sake. And I guess you can go a whole sort of political art history about it, but I think there was a kind of disillusionment with art for political reasons, and it was just art for art's sake that she really believed in, I guess.
Well, I think what's clear in the book is that she hung around with Rudy Burckhardt, your father, and Edwin Denby, and they were both, I would say, fairly dismissive of the notion of political art.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I mean that's I think, I can't actually, you're right. I mean, I can't say where she got it from, but I think that all those people, I mean, Rudy and Edwin and all of them really, helped her with that. I mean,
So,
push that.
The picture that she paints of the art world is, it's almost Edenic in a way. What would you say is the big difference between the art world then and the art world now?
Geez, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't. I mean, I was around then, but I was just a kid. So I don't really remember the art world that much. I remember it as gossip. I mean, a lot of the names of these people. I mean, I met Elaine, and she was nice to me because I was a kid, or I was Edith and Rudy's kid. And I played with Fairfield Porter's kids, but I didn't. Well, the one thing is that everybody was poor.
Yes.
And a loft is a fancy thing now, as we all know. I mean, lofts cost millions of dollars and whatever. Lofts in those days, they were cheap. That's why people lived in them. I was kind of embarrassed. I was a little embarrassed about bringing my friends home because I didn't live in a regular apartment when I was in grade school, because I just lived in a loft, and there was like paint and stuff all over the place, and I wanted to live in a regular apartment.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, money is the big difference, I think, in the art world. And she says that they always ate in the Horn and Hardharts because Elaine didn't like to cook, So, so they took all their meals in Horn and Hardharts or in cafes. And they had no money. And eventually, of course, the Kooning got quite a lot of money. And he said, well, how many camel hair overcoats can I have at one time, So, they didn't know what to do with all that money.
Yeah, no, I mean, I remember the automat. That was like, it said, there's one of the slogan, or it was less work for mother. And I remember when, there were times when, for whatever reason, my mother wasn't going to cook that night, and my father didn't cook in those days, and so that's where we went. Yeah.
One of the things that Edith talks about, she doesn't rant about it, but she does talk about it, is being the wife of an artist as well as an artist herself, and how sometimes she would feel dismissed or condescended to, and and that was true of all the women who were married to artists, but also artists on their own level.
Yeah, I remember she talks at some point. She talks about going to these parties with Rudy and Edwin, and Rudy was Edwin's little friend, and then she was, I guess, Edwin's little friend's wife. But what she does, what I kind of like what she, whenever she mentions a couple, she always mentions the woman first. She always talks about Helen and Elliot Carter, Elaine and Bill de Kooning, right. Jane and Paul Bowles. She's always, and I think that's like a little sort of subtle little.
She has a very funny story about Edwin Denby and Paul Bowles, and Paul Bowles was going on, and Edwin said, "Oh, come off it. You know who the writer is in this family," meaning Jane.
Yeah.
That was a dig for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That's in the books.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that you feel in the book is that there is a kind of triangle between Edith and Rudy and Edwin, because Rudy and Edwin would often go off together.
I think she called Edwin her mother-in-law at some point.
I mean, essentially, she's good-humored about it, but it must have not always been so comfortable. And at one point, when Rudy was having a lot of extramarital affairs, which she doesn't go into at length, but she just says, she went to Edwin and said, "My heart's broken, what should I do?" And Edwin said, "Well, read some Gertrude Stein."
That's pretty funny.
I tell you, if somebody gave me that advice, I would clunk them on the head.
Yeah. But, I mean, yeah. Sure.
So what was it like for you growing up and observing this whole dynamic?
I was a kid, and I kind of, even with my parents, my parents would fight, and I guess that's what many kids kids have parents that fight. But
Yeah.
you know, and then we went to Italy, and that was kind of that was sort of sudden for me at first to go to Italy. I didn't expect it. But you know, other than that, I mean, I was kind of, I have to say, I was mostly, you know, oblivious to a lot of the art world stuff that was going on. I mean, you know, I heard them, a lot of you know, later on I would hear these names, like, I mean, like Bob De Niro, and that I don't think I ever met him or anything, but I always remembered him as a name that they had gossiped about.
But you yourself became a photographer and a filmmaker, so were you influenced by some of the photography that was being done then?
Well, I certainly was influenced by Rudy's photography. He taught me how to do it, basically, and we used to, that was one of the things we did together when I was a kid. We made pinhole cameras, and we developed the film and that kind of thing. But I got to say, I mean, one of the cute things that I'm supposed to have said that I don't remember saying was I said that I don't want to be an artist like everybody else, and I wanted to be a scientist, and I don't know, I didn't succeed.
Didn't work out.
No.
Yeah. No, I think that I do think Rudy is a great photographer, and part of his greatness is that he just looks at things head on instead of trying to construct them in a moral or political way. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that I got from him was to not make the prints heavy. I mean, he you know, when you take a black and white picture, you print it in the darkroom. You can make it light or you can make it dark. And I think one of the things I learned from him was always to find the lightest part of the picture and make it almost as light as the paper. I mean, so there's there's very little difference between the light part of the picture and the photo paper, where that hasn't been printed on at all, and everything else keep it kind of light. And I really, anyhow, that was to me that's a very special thing about his photography, and I like that too.
Yeah, one thing that struck me when I was reading this book was how all the arts were, how people all seem to know each other. That is, the poets, the composers, Elliott Carter and John Cage, the dancers. It seemed like a small world in a sense that you could actually fit the whole art world in one bar.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
is that just my nostalgia for a period when I wasn't alive yet?
Yeah. Well, she worked for Art News, and Tom Hess was the editor, and she was one of the so-called editorial associates, and they were supposed to write something. It could be only a sentence or like a little paragraph about every show in New York.
Yes.
And
amazing.
You could do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she has some very interesting things to say about the poet critics, like John Ashbery and James Schuyler, versus the artist critics. And she basically says that maybe I'm paraphrasing too brusquely, but she says that the poet critics wrote very nice, pretty reviews, but they didn't tell the artist anything. Whereas the artist critics, would go under the skin,
Yeah, yeah. Well, on the other hand, one of the great stories in the book is about Frank O'Hara's review of Cy Twombly. That's a lot of fun. You have to read the book.
Yeah, I certainly recommend that you do read this book. I just kept feeling when I was reading it that she was a good writer. It wasn't just that she was present on the scene, but that she had a kind of witty perspective, and part of it was that she was able to mock herself as a young woman,
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. But she always had a sense of humor, I think. Yeah.
Like she says, well, I was an art student, so naturally I was very doctrinaire,
Right, yeah.
And so she's aware of how she, how she's changed her mind since then,
Yeah. I think she talks about when she was in England before she came here, and she saw the paintings of Turner, and she liked them, but she didn't want to tell anybody that because she thought they'd think it's kitsch. Actually, that Turner might be considered kitsch.
But she was very influential. For instance, she was going on about how much she liked Alexander Calder, and the Koonings said, "Well, we don't like him." And then she said, I could never like Calder after that. So, you know, they were poor, but they were very snobbish, you know.
Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, I mean, she talks about, you know, staying up all night, drinking coffee, talking about art, and I wonder what those conversations were. You know? Yeah.
Right. She doesn't, it's not particularly a smutty book. I mean, she didn't give us a lowdown on all the love affairs. She just says they were going on, that's all.
Yeah, yeah, she didn't, it's not a, settling scores kind of a book.
No, and in fact, I know that I mentioned this to you, but she doesn't really draw a full portrait of Rudy the way she does of all the other artists in the book.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, there are some writings among her stuff about Rudy, and they are a little bit kind of, you know, what was he thinking? Why was he doing this about things? And I think, you know, she was kind of reserved in writing this book, and also, you know, what I noticed was very interesting in, you know, in all this stuff of hers that's at Columbia, there's a lot of correspondence between her and Rudy. And they were really, you know, it didn't take too long before them to get quite cordial. I mean, they were quite friendly. And she became a really good friend with Yvonne, too, Rudy's second wife. And so, you know,
it's not mentioned in the book, but Rudy also wrote a great deal.
Yes. Yeah.
This is something that I, you know, can't help wishing for, is that these artists were so literary.
Yeah. I look at these collection of letters, and those people could write like motherfuckers. I mean, they really. You know, a lot of these letters. I mean, she had correspondence with various people. I remember seeing this one letter from Carol E. Schneemann or something. It was like, you know, 3 pages, single spaced. You know, no cross-outs. I mean, they just really know how, you know.
Well, then
it's a lost art, I guess. Well, for me it is.
Yeah, they wrote letters.
Not for you, but for me.
Thank you. We can open this up to questions.
Yeah.
I'm sure you might have some. So, any thoughts?
I have a Rudy comment.
Yes.
She took it a little bit for granted that you knew about Rudy. That, in other words, there's a lot of places like that in the book, as if you already know it.
Interesting.
She fills in about some things, but she accepts that you know who Rudy is practically, takes him for granted a little bit. But he's very familiar in it. It's not unfriendly.
Right.
You got to read Philip's book.
Right.
Before that.
Yeah, I wrote a monograph on Rudy. Yeah.
And you've been a champion.
Other questions or thoughts? Yes, Mr. Lopate?
I knew Ed Reinhardt and Mark Rothko. Reinhardt, it was all about politics, the politics of the art world and the politics of the real world. And I'm not hearing much about that, because these were artists who also were very involved in what was going on beyond. Well, first of all, in the case of Ed, he had to fight to even defend what he was doing, but also he was very far to the left and came under a lot of attack. In the case of Rothko, unfortunately, I studied with him the year that he committed suicide, and I'm wondering if some of these people were very emotionally troubled.
Yeah, they were emotionally troubled. There's no question about it. But so, what's your point?
Well, whether she deals with that in her book, whether she deals with those other aspects of how artists were living in the real world and living lives that went beyond just trying to be recognized and respected.
Well, sure. There's a very beautiful chapter on Francisco Woodman, the photographer who committed suicide, and Edith had a very strong relationship to it. What were you going to say?
No, I mean, I was saying, I mean, I think it's a conscious decision on Edith's part in this manuscript was to talk about art for art's sake. I mean, I remember going on Ban the Bomb marches when I was 10 years old. You know, I mean, she was very engaged in that kind of thing, and always from then on, from before that and from then on. You know, and I think she was hanging out with Trotskyists in London. before she came here. I think in this case, I mean, some of the artists, like the people, like Edwin and Rudy, really, unlike Rothko and Reinhardt, were really disengaged about politics. And I think she consciously sort of, I guess she maybe she had like two parts to her life in a way. I mean, there was the part with the art, which was art for art's sake, and then her political engagement, which was always fairly strong too.
Yeah, and certainly Guston was very involved. Yes.
Excuse me, was there ever a period in her creative experience where she seriously doubted herself, and was it so serious that she might have been a little bit psychologically imbalanced?
I never felt Edith was psychologically imbalanced.
I think I used to think she was crazy because she's my mother. But I mean,
Highly allowable.
yeah. But I think she always doubted herself, in a certain sense. She always, but on the other hand, I think that art for her was like it. I mean, was everything, and so she always had that to guide her. It was like you can be a Buddhist or a communist or an artist. I mean, she was an artist in the sense of belief.
So you're saying it was therapy?
Pardon?
No, it was a religion in a way. It was a religion.
Religion and therapy and all that stuff. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, but I mean, she did talk about, she did say, oh, when I was very depressed and stuff like that. I mean, so she did talk about that. Yeah. Not in the book so much, but in real life.
Any other questions or thoughts? Yes, back there.
Can we buy the book here?
No.
You can have them sign it and then pay for it on your way out.
Yeah, we wish Edith could sign it.
Yeah. I'll forge her name for you.
Yes.
Jacob, your mom was basically a refugee from the Nazis, and she made a new life for herself in America. How important was her Jewish identity to her, and did she attempt to pass on any of that to you?
She never forgot it, that she was a Jew, and also, my grandmother, her mother, lived here, and I mean, she lived in Washington Heights when I was very little, and then most of the time that I remember, she lived in Queens. Mm-hmm. And they were both very aware of being Jewish, but my grandmother said that after the war, after she came here, she never set foot in a synagogue, and she never voted either. So it was, and I can't really explain that, but I believe, I mean, I understand it, but I can't explain it, and that feeling that they had, and so Edith is buried in the non-Catholic cemetery in Rome. And she expressly wished to be buried there, and it's not Catholic, it's not Jewish, it's not anything. It's it also has Shelley and Keats buried there too.
When they talked to you about you're going to get a bar mitzvah.
I didn't. What happened was they sent me to St. Luke's School, which is because it was it was a good school or something like. It was better than the public schools or whatever. So I had to go to chapel every day, and I had to do all that stuff, and they were quite amused by that. But they let me do it. Nobody complained.
Yes.
I'm curious. Why Rome? Why did you end up there? What drew her there? What happened?
Well, that's part of her story. I mean, she, when she was young, in Germany, her father thought she should learn languages. And to do that, first he sent her to a kind of a boarding school in Alsace-Lorraine, in France, and then he sent her to be a au pair in Florence. And she fell in love with Italian art then. And I think Rome is a bigger city than Florence to move to. I mean, that's, I'm oversimplifying it because I remember going to Italy, to traveling through Europe and Italy, various times before we went there, and she also talks about going before I was born too. So she always had this, I guess, a love for Italy ever since she was a
But
teenager.
at a certain point, she moved there.
Well, yeah, I mean that's when my parents split up.
Yeah, she wanted to get out of New York and get away from that unhappiness.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yes.
Hi, her painting and her writing, you know, her book was not, I read some of it early also, the book was not sort of reporting or gossipy. It was like really specific voice that you couldn't replicate. And I just wondered, so she was an artist as a writer and an artist as a painter, and I've seen some, and I don't know if there's any connection between them, or
Well, she said, I don't know.
maybe it's a non-question, but
Yeah.
her book wasn't just saying I saw this one and I saw that one. So
Yeah.
such a specific voice.
Well, she said, I don't know if I'm an artist who paints or a painter who writes. You know, she was writing and painting all along. You know, I mean, her first published article was, it was in some German refugee magazine in like 1944 or something like that. And she said, one of the things she says is that when she first saw de Koonings, she was going to the Art Students League, and she wanted to write an article about de Kooning in the Art Students League magazine, and the editor or whatever said, no, we should write about somebody else who was relatively insignificant. She mentioned who it was, somebody relatively insignificant. She said, I could have been the first person to write about
Yeah. I mean, you could just see in some of her sentences, you just an indelible image comes up from reading her.
Did it seem odd to you that she wrote in English?
That's a good question. I mean, you know, both of my parents were German speakers. Brought up as German speakers.
Yes.
They never spoke German in front of me, ever, and they never tried to teach me German or anything. She tried to make me learn Italian, but never German. And so, you know, I think it's kind of odd that both of them were so good at speaking English and speaking and writing in English. But I mean, because I remember, you know, my grandmother who came here when she was older, spoke pretty good English, but she had a ferocious accent. And Edith and Rudy, they had sometimes very mild accents. Sometimes
I think Rudy had more of an accent than Edith, actually.
Yeah, and she had, I guess, what's called a mid-Atlantic accent, and I mean, her style is sort of half English and half American.
She also wrote for the Herald Tribune, so even before Wanted in Rome, she always wrote in English about art, and of all kinds, especially what she was seeing in Rome.
Yeah.
She had a long history of writing in English for English.
Yeah, well, with Art News, of course.
Yes, but that was here. But I mean, even after she went to Europe.
Yeah. And she, you know, I mean, I noticed, she has I have some catalogs of hers for shows in Italy, in which she would write a kind of an autobiography, which was different each time. Which, I mean, she didn't change facts, but she added different things or whatever. And she always wrote in English, and somebody would translate it into Italian for her, even though she spoke Italian very well. But English became her language.
Her writing language.
Yeah.
Yes.
Significantly, because she was a painter as well, all of her descriptions of artwork is thrilling, accurate, and thrilling, and I enjoy every time I read it again. It's really a great example.
She was an artist critic. Yes, you had a hand.
Yeah, Jacob, first of all, congratulations on this book. And I was just wondering, in compiling this book about your mother, was there one anecdote that was really emotional for you?
I can't think of anyone in particular. I mean, if I think about it harder, I can tell you later, but I can't think of anything right now.
It's kind of funny reading about you in diapers and everything.
Oh, yeah. Well, but I think I peed on a de Kooning at one point, didn't I? I think she was changing my diapers, and there was a de Kooning drawing, tacked up onto the wall next to me, and I peed on it, something like that. Oh, thing.
At least you didn't erase it like Rauschenberg.
Yeah.
Oh, and I think that's it. Thanks very much for being so
Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. We'll have a signing right over here. Feel free to line up, and you don't have to buy the book before you get it signed. You can take it down and buy it afterwards. You don't have to go the whole loop-de-loop. But thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it, and it's always wonderful to see you. And thank you so much for taking the time.
Great job.